They came in clothes made of silk and silver. One after another, the daughters of noble families walked up the steps toward the Iron Throne. They looked like gifts being given to a god who had forgotten how to want anything. Lady Seraphina from the Eastern Vale came first. She carried a wooden chest full of raw sapphires. These gems had been dug from the deepest caves in her father's land. She bowed low. Her golden hair fell down like a curtain. Her smile was practiced and very careful. The Alpha King did not look at her. His eyes stayed fixed on the far wall of the great hall. Torchlight made shadows dance on the old stone. His face had no warmth at all. It looked like a grave in winter. Lady Cordelia from the northern ridge came next. She brought a sword that had been made in dragon fire. The handle was wrapped in the white leather of a wolf's hide. She knelt down and gave the sword with both hands. Her voice was strong and full of respect. "For the king who has no equal in battle," she said. The king lifted one finger from the arm of his throne. Next to him stood a large, scarred man named Halvard. Halvard stepped forward and took the sword for the king. The king never touched it. These women had been arriving for 3 days. There were 47 of them. They came from the strongest wolf paps in the land. Each one had been chosen by her father, the alpha of her pack. They all wanted the same thing. Every she-wolf in the kingdom dreamed of this position. Luna to the Alpha King, Queen of Wolves, mate to the most powerful creature on earth. His name was Cale Thornvein. He was the Alpha King of the Iron Sovereignty and High Lord of the 5 territories. He was the wolf who had not smiled in 300 years. He sat on his throne made of carved black stone and felt nothing. Not boredom, not irritation, not even the dull ache of doing his duty. Nothing. A curse had taken everything from him long ago. First, the curse took away his ability to feel warmth. He could no longer feel the sun on his skin, the heat from a fireplace, or the comfort of a fur coat in winter. Then it took away his sense of taste. Then it took away color. The world became only shades of gray and iron around his 2nd century of life. Then the curse reached deeper. It began to eat away whatever was left of his feelings. Joy went first, then grief, then anger. Anger had been the last thing that kept him sharp. Now there was only a huge frozen silence where his soul used to be. His wolf, which once roared like a storm inside his chest, had gone quiet decades ago. It was still alive. He could feel it the way you feel a leg that has fallen asleep. But it no longer spoke to him. It no longer surged with power. It no longer cared. 300 years of ruling. 300 years of ice. The 40th woman was now stepping forward. She was another lord's daughter, dressed in green velvet. But Cale's attention had already moved to the window behind the throne. Outside, gray sky pressed against gray stone. The world looked exactly as dead as he felt. Then something changed. Near the doors the crowd shifted. A murmur rippled through the great hall. This was not the quiet, respectful sound that came with each noble presentation. This was something uglier. A scuffle. A sharp voice. The sound of someone being pushed. Cale's eyes moved to the back of the hall. Not because he cared, but because movement was movement. Even a frozen king notices a disturbance. She was small. That was the first thing he noticed. Small and thin. She wore a dress that had been washed so many times that nobody could guess its original color. Her hair was dark, pulled back in a braid that had partly come undone. There was a bruise on her jaw. It was fresh and turning purple at the edges. She made no effort to hide it. 2 guards held her by the arms. Behind her stood a thick-necked lord. Cale recognized him distantly as Lord Merrin of the Ashwood pack. Lord Merrin was pointing toward the door with clear disgust. "She is no one," Lord Merrin spat, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "A kitchen rat. She followed the procession like a stray. She should be removed before she embarrasses this court further." The girl did not fight the guards. She did not beg. She did not explain or cry. She looked directly at the throne. Directly at Cale. And something inside him shifted. Something that had not moved in so long that he had forgotten its name. His wolf opened one eye. "Release her." The words left his mouth before his mind had agreed to them. His voice was low and rough from not being used. He had not spoken without being asked in weeks. The sound cut through the great hall like a blade being drawn across stone. Every head turned. The guards dropped the girl's arms as if they had been burned. Halvard leaned closer to the king. His scarred face was creased with worry. "My ting?" he asked. His eyes had not left the girl. She stood alone now, in the aisle between the rows of nobles. She was small and battered and perfectly still. She was holding something in her hands. It was not a chest of jewels, not a weapon, not a scroll of alliance. A piece of bread. Dark, coarse bread, the kind baked in village ovens by people who could not afford fine flour. It was half-eaten. She had been saving it. She walked forward. The silence in the great hall was complete. It was the kind of silence that falls when every wolf in a room senses that something never seen before is happening, and none of them understand what. She stopped at the bottom of the throne steps. She did not bow. She did not kneel. She looked up at him with dark, steady eyes that were completely unafraid. She held out the bread. "You look hungry," she said. "If you enjoy stories like this one, take a moment to hit that like button. It helps more than you know, and it tells me you want more. Not hungry for power, not hungry for conquest or alliance, or the careful mating that every wolf in this room had come to negotiate. Just hungry. As if she could see through the crown, through the throne, through 3 centuries of ice, and find the starving thing underneath." Kale stared at her. The great hall stared at him. 47 noble daughters in silk and jewels stared at the ragged girl who had just offered their king a crust of bread with the same seriousness that they had offered fortunes. He reached out and took it. And for the first time in 300 years, Kale Thornvame felt warmth. Not just a feeling like warmth. Actual physical warmth. Heat bloomed from the spot where their skin touched. It raced up his arm and flooded into his chest like sunlight pouring through a crack in a frozen wall. His wolf surged awake with a sound that was not a growl, but a roar. A deafening, desperate, joyful howl that shook every nerve in his body and nearly drove him to his feet. "Mate, mate, mate." The bread trembled in his hand. His fingers had closed around it with a grip that was almost savage. His eyes, which had been flat and gray and dead for longer than anyone in this room had been alive, blazed gold. The girl saw it. She saw the change in his eyes, the impossible color flooding through gray like melted metal. She took one step back, not in fear, in recognition, as if something inside her had answered, and the answer scared her. "What is your name?" His voice was barely human. "Elowen," she said. "I am no one's daughter. I belong to no pack. I came because I was hungry too." Lord Marin stepped forward. His face was twisted with anger. "Your Majesty, this creature is an Omega, lower than an Omega. She was cast out of the Ashwood pack for Halvard." Kale's voice dropped to a pitch that made the torches on the walls flicker. "If Lord Marin speaks again without my permission, remove his tongue." The silence that followed was not the silence of respect. It was the silence of fear. Kale walked down the steps of his throne. He had not walked down those steps for any of the 47 noble daughters. He had not risen from his seat during the 3 days of this procession. Every wolf in the room knew how important this was, and every wolf was terrified. He stopped in front of Elowen. She barely reached his chest. Up close, the bruise on her jaw was worse than it had looked from far away. It was layered, the kind that comes from many hits, not just one. Her hands were rough with hard work. Her wrists were thin. She smelled of wood smoke and wild thyme, and something else beneath both, that made his wolf press against his ribs so hard, he thought his bones might crack. "You will stay," he said. It was not a request, but it was not a command either. There was something broken in his voice. A need so raw it had no armor. Elowen looked up at him. The gold in his eyes was fading and flickering, as if the warmth was already trying to leave. She could feel the cold pouring off him beneath that single point of heat, an endless pit of frost that went down and down. "I have nowhere else to go," she said quietly, "but I will not be kept." The corner of his mouth moved. It was not a smile. It was the ghost of a memory of what a smile had once felt like. "Then stay because you choose to." She held his eyes for a long moment, then she nodded once. Behind them in the watching crowd, Lady Seraphina's hand clenched around the arm of her chair until the wood creaked. Next to her sat an older woman in black. Her name was Vespera. She had been the advisor to the king's late mother, and was the most powerful female wolf in the court. She watched the scene with an expression that showed no surprise at all, only careful thought. They gave Elowen a room in the East Tower. It was simple but clean, a narrow bed, a fireplace, a window that looked over the inner courtyard where warriors trained at dawn. It was the finest room Elowen had ever had. She stood in the middle of it for a long time, listening to the wind against the stone, trying to understand what had happened. She knew about mate bonds. Every wolf did, even the ones who had been thrown away, even the ones raised in kitchen corners, sleeping on stone floors. The bond was sacred. It was not something you chose. Your wolf recognized its other half before your mind could get in the way. But Elowen had never shifted into a wolf. Not once. She had been told all her life that she was broken, too weak, too damaged to carry the wolf that should have lived inside her. Lord Marin had used that as an excuse for everything. The beatings, the starvation, the years of work without status, without protection, without a name that anyone bothered to learn. If she had no wolf, how could the bond have formed? She pressed her palm to her chest. Something had fluttered there when his fingers touched hers. A feeling like a heartbeat that was not her own. Fast and fierce and achingly warm. A knock at the door. She opened it and found not a guard, but a small, round-faced woman with kind eyes and flowers on her apron. "I am Marta," the woman said simply. "I run the kitchens. I brought you something to eat." She held out a tray. Warm stew, fresh bread, a cup of something that steamed. "And I wanted to tell you before anyone else does, that the last woman who held the king's attention was Lady Thessaly. She was beautiful and ambitious. She told everyone she would be Luna within the month." Elowen took the tray. "What happened to her?" Marta's kind eyes went flat. "She vanished 3 months ago. Vespera said she left of her own accord, but her belongings were still in her room, and her horse was still in the stable." She paused. "Be careful who you trust in this place. Not everyone who smiles at you wants you to survive." The door closed. Elowen sat on the edge of the narrow bed. The warm stew sat untouched. She thought about the woman who had vanished, and the advisor who had watched today's scene with calculating eyes. He found her in the library 3 nights later. Cale had not meant to search for her. He had spent the days between doing what he always did, holding meetings, settling disputes between territories, commanding his soldiers with the mechanical skill of a king who ruled by ability rather than passion. The warmth from her touch had faded within hours. The cold had rushed back in worse than before, as if the curse were punishing him for the short time of warmth. But his wolf would not stay quiet now. After decades of silence, it paced and growled and pulled toward the East Tower with a focus that was almost crazy. So he told himself he was walking the hallways for safety. He told himself he heard a noise. He told himself many lies, one after another. Then he was standing in the doorway of the library, and she was sitting cross-legged on the floor, beside a dying fire, reading a book that was nearly as big as her body. "You can read," he said. Then he hated himself for the surprise in his voice. "Elowen did not look up. An old hewer taught me when I was 7. Lord Marin had her whipped for wasting time on an omega. She taught me in secret after that." She turned a page. The firelight played across her face, softening the bruise, which had faded from purple to yellow-green. For a moment, she looked less like a castaway and more like a scholar. "What are you reading?" "A history of the Bloodfrost curse." Now she looked up. Her dark eyes were sharp with something that was not quite an accusation, but was very close. "Fascinating subject," she said, "especially the part about how it was cast." Cale went very still. 312 years ago, Elowen continued. Her voice was quiet but steady. A witch named Morwen cursed the Alpha King's bloodline after his father executed her daughter for practicing magic without permission. First warmth, then sensation, then emotion, then his wolf, finally his life. The curse could only be kept alive by a living anchor, someone close to the king who fed the curse with their own will. She closed the book. "Someone in this fortress is keeping you dying, Your Majesty, and they have been doing it for 300 years. The fire cracked. A log fell and sent up a shower of sparks. The sudden flash of light caught the gold that had flooded back into Cale's eyes. "You found this in 3 days," he said. His voice held something that might have been wonder, if the curse had left him enough to feel it. I found it because I looked, she said. Has no one else looked? The question landed like a stone dropped into deep water. The answer, the one he had never let himself think about, was no. No one had looked. Not Halvard, who was loyal but did not ask questions. Not his advisors, who managed the curse like a long-term sickness that could be treated but never cured. Not Vespera, who had served 3 generations of the Thornbane family, and who surely must have— He stopped. Elowen watched the thought arrive on his face. She did not speak. She waited, the way you wait when someone is reaching the edge of a truth they have been circling for a very long time. Vespera, he said. She has been at court for 300 years, Elowen said carefully, since before the curse, since before Morwen. She was your mother's closest advisor, and your mother's before that. That does not make her— When Lady Thessaly began to get close to you, she disappeared. Marta told me. And tonight, when I asked Marta who assigned this room, this specific room in the East Tower, far from the rest of the court, she said Vespera. The cold inside Kale's chest clenched like a fist, not the curse's numbness, something worse, something that felt, without any chance of being true, like the beginning of fear. Why are you telling me this? Elowen stood. She was still so small, still barely to his chest, but there was nothing small about the way she held his eyes. Because you took my bread, she said, and because I think you have been starving for a very long time, and no one in this fortress has cared enough to ask why. He crossed the space between them, in 2 long strides, not to threaten, because he was desperate. He stood so close that she could feel the unnatural cold coming off his skin, so close that his breath should have been warm against her forehead, but it was not. His hand rose and stopped, trembling, actually trembling, 1 inch from her jaw. If I touch you, he said, and his voice was wrecked, barely above a whisper. The warmth comes back, but it leaves again, and each time it leaves, the cold is worse. The curse fights it. Elowen reached up and took his hand. She pressed it to her cheek. The warmth flooded through him like a dam breaking open. Not just heat, but feeling, texture, the impossible softness of her skin, the flutter of her pulse under his fingers. The scent of wild thyme and wood smoke so clear it made his eyes sting. Then we will have to be faster than the curse, she said. What can we learn from Elowen and Kale? This story is not just about wolves, kings, and magic. It is a story about real things that happen to real people. Let us look at the important lessons hidden inside this tale. Kindness is powerful, even when you have almost nothing. Elowen had no jewels, no sword, no fine clothes. She only had half a piece of bread, but she gave it to someone who looked hungrier than her. That small, simple act of kindness broke a 300-year curse. In real life, you do not need to be rich or famous to help someone. A kind word, a shared snack, or just asking, "Are you okay?" can change someone's whole day, or even their whole life. Being different does not mean being broken. Everyone thought Elowen was worthless because she could not shift into a wolf. They called her defective, too weak, too small. But her difference was actually her greatest strength. She was a Solaris wolf, a kind thought to be gone forever. In school and in life, kids who learn differently, act differently, or look different are often teased or left out. But that difference might be the very thing that makes them special. Never let anyone convince you that being different means being less. Ask questions. Look for the truth. For 300 years no one asked why the king was so cold. No one looked beyond what they were told. Elowen went to the library, read old books, and asked Marta questions. She found the truth that everyone else had missed. In your own life, asking why and how and what if can help you learn amazing things. Read, ask, and think for yourself. Cruelty is often hidden behind a smile. Vespera seemed kind and helpful. She had been at court for centuries, but she was the one keeping the curse alive. She smiled while freezing the king. In the real world, not everyone who seems nice has good intentions. That does not mean you should be afraid of everyone. It means you should pay attention to how people treat those who are weaker than them. That is a better clue to their heart than their smile. You do not need permission to be brave. No one chose Elowen to save the king. No one gave her a title or an army. She walked into that great hall on her own, with her own 2 feet and her half-eaten bread. She was brave because she chose to be. You do not need a teacher to tell you to stand up for a friend. You do not need a parent to tell you to do the right thing. Bravery is a choice, and you can make it right now. A final thought to carry with you. The coldest heart can be warmed. The smallest person can be the strongest. And the simplest gift, like a piece of bread, can be more precious than all the sapphires in the world. Be like Elowen. Look for the hungry, the lonely, the frozen, and offer what you have. Not when you are rich, not when you are powerful. Right now, just as you are. If this story moved you, please subscribe so you never miss the next one. I will see you in the next tale.